Okay, good morning everybody. Lovely to be here and great to be back at ZPN again. And I should start off just by saying congratulations on hosting what the brief says, and there's no immodesty in this from the ZPN team, is the inaugural International Networked Energy and E-Mobility Day. I think it was first titled as Love Electric, so that was a fairly easier way for me to get my brain around what we were really talking about than some grand title. I've been asked to say a few words to sort of kick off the session and then to take any questions you may want. But I'll say right at the beginning that I am not the expert on everything that goes on in ZPN and the technical issues around energy storage. We have lots of wonderful scientists who do that. I'm not the expert. What I hope I can do though is just pull out where this work and this subject fits into the bigger picture. And I'm going to actually finish with 6 public policy issues that I think we have to sort out to enable you to be as successful as you can be and the sector to move forward. So that's the sort of structure that we're going to put around this, if that's okay. And I hope some of what I will say will confirm what Jim has said as well, because if we're not joined up on this, God help us, frankly. So hopefully that will be consistent. Now, of course, the really big context here is, I'll say, the world's, certainly Britain's, mission to be net zero UK target by 2050. Our target in the West Midlands is 2041, and the fact that we are 9 years ahead of the UK target shows an utter commitment there. And I think what is clear, if I reflect back on the last 4 years since we set that target, is all the local authorities across the West Midlands, including, of course, Coventry City Council, came together to agree that regional target and the regional plan. They have their own targets as well. Our role in the region is partly to enable them to achieve their own individual target. 2041 we chose because, yes, it was ambitious, but it's also realistic. So we actually got a lot of independent academic research saying the pace that you're on, the quickening that's needed, what is a realistic target? There's all sorts banded around. We think ours is achievable. Our progress so far is good, but not good enough. Why do I say it's good? Since 1990, we are halfway there. And actually, we've seen a reduction in carbon emissions of about 4.5% per year. To get to the rest of the target, we need to double that to a compound rate of about, not quite doubling, but get to a compound rate of about 7% a year. So to be totally honest, just like everywhere else in the country, if they were honest, we are not on target, but we are doing pretty well. And the good news is individual authorities' plans were assessed independently about 9 months ago now, and the West Midlands Combined Authority, which I lead, and a number of our authorities in the region were judged to be best in class. So we're in a good position, and we put on the table a plan, some money, and most importantly, coordination across our different areas to see how we could achieve that target. And I'm going to say a little bit about 3 areas: transport, industry, and then we will come to domestic. And the reason for that is 1/3 of our emissions are in transport, 1/3 in industry, and 1/3 in domestic. It varies a bit, different regions of the country, depending on how strong their industrial base is. We are very simple. It's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So how are we doing in each, and where do you fit into that, and what issues are there, is perhaps the honest assessment. Transport is actually the best area for us. It's the area where we are making most progress. The reduction is quite strong, and the e-mobility piece is obviously a critical piece of this. So if you think of the investments that are being made in e-mobility, first of all, in public transport, I mean, it's great to have this conversation in Coventry, because our bus fleet, you are leading the way nationally. We won the competition for Coventry to be the all-electric bus city, and you only have to spend a few minutes in the city centre now, and the electric buses come by one after another. A commitment by 2025 to a full electric fleet here, and Coventry will be the first city in the country to do that. Combination of government money, a little from TfWM, huge support from the City Council, and also, critically, the private provider, National Express, Stagecoach, also putting their money on the table. There's e-bikes on the streets, of course. There's e-scooters in Birmingham, not Coventry, although we have our challenges with that. And of course, our rail fleet is also constantly being upgraded as well. And the thing to really look forward to is the latest versions of electric trains coming on the cross-city line in Birmingham very shortly, and Avanti also just having phased out their worst polluting diesel trains, the Voyagers, as well. So we're seeing constant progress there. For the anoraks in the room, we still haven't got a solution to the Chiltern fleet on the line up through Warwickshire and into Snowdale, but genuinely good progress on getting better public transport, and then of course making sure the public transport that there is electric rather than anything else. And the big news in Coventry, which I'm sure Jim talked about, so I won't go on to length, is of course the Very Light Rail project, partly funded by the CA, partly by the City Council, the new technology here, and we're both looking forward to getting to the demonstrator track in the city very shortly. Then in industry, we're also making good progress. Obviously, every business has its own targets. They're driving themselves. Let's be clear about that. And lots of you are probably from elements of business where that is happening. But what I'm particularly pleased about is we have been one of the 5 pilot areas for the government's industrial decarbonisation work, focused particularly on the Black Country rather than Coventry and Warwickshire, taking some of our most energy intensive businesses and saying, how are we actually going to publicly subsidise greater energy efficiency in there? It's far from a done deal, but we're certainly getting, particularly through our Industrial Energy Task Force, ideas in place, examples of companies that have done this to vastly improve their energy efficiency. So that too is on a good trajectory. The biggest challenge, though, in our numbers is domestic carbon emissions. So the way the projections look, we're on target with transport, we're on our way industry, we're making relatively little progress with domestic. And this is where some of the biggest public policy issues comes out. Everybody talks about retrofitting housing stock in the West Midlands, 1 million homes. We need to get to net zero to retrofit about 300,000 of them is our estimate. We're doing currently, again, great demonstrator in Coventry and Solihull and Dudley are the 3 areas which are making most progress here. We're making progress in about 1,000 homes this winter just gone, about another 3,000, the funding just having come through, but actually it is relatively tiny, you can see, compared to the target. So my prediction is that will be the toughest area. And again, I will come to some public policy issues. But perhaps the biggest contribution we can make in the West Midlands to this is thinking about the automotive sector and how we're changing that sector. And the good news is, of course, the electrification of that sector is one of our main economic objectives. In our plan for growth, the regional plan for how we grow our economy after COVID, this sector is one of our key targets. And the good news, and again, I suspect Jim talked about some of this, is that that sector is being built rapidly. And this one is focused on Coventry and Warwickshire rather more than Birmingham and the Black Country. And if you look at that cluster that is coming around Coventry, you see the investors that are here already. Obviously, LEVC up at Anstey, obviously JLR saying that Solihull will be the centre of their electric vehicle assembly. We've got the news from Lotus. We've got a number of other inward investors coming, like TVS, for example, doing their electric motorbike assembly and research about to come as well. And then we've got some of the new companies really getting to scale now. A lovely story with Origo making the pods, where they're now a listed company on the AIM market. And you see some other imaginative new startups like Maving electric bikes being made here, Tevra electric HGVs. And of course, you're seeing lots in the supply chain as well. A wonderful example at Tata Consultancy down in Warwick, employing lots of people specialising in this area. And one of our homegrown success also in Warwick, Comtech, literally 1,000 people looking at this sector there in the consultancy piece. And then one of the real strength, of course, our universities. You go anywhere in the world. I was out in India last autumn talking about this sector and where it's based, and anyone can see the strength, particularly of Warwick University, in the R&D that really drives this forward. So genuinely, the ingredients for a successful cluster are coming together. The one ingredient we still need, and I know Jim's already talked about this, but I'll add my voice to this, is of course the Gigafactory. I think of it like the keystone of the bridge for this new cluster. It is critical that we secure that, and I want to be really optimistic about this. We're facing questions at the moment. Well, it looks as though JLR will not, or JLR or Tata will not come here. It's all rumour what they're going to do at the moment. If I may be honest, the government's leaked the story twice, but Tata haven't confirmed anything yet. But let's assume the rumours are correct. So they go to Somerset. It's obviously important that they're there rather than in a European country, but it means we have to find a different investor for the Coventry site, and we will find one, because we need to move on in our thinking about this. Everyone thinks it just has to be an automotive company. Not true. If you look at the biggest battery manufacturers around the world, they are experts in that, and they sell to lots of different customers. And my prediction is we will end up with one of those consolidators there, and it is genuinely true that those conversations are at a good state at the moment. So I am extremely determined with all the members of the partnership, and indeed confident that we will land that, and it's really critical that we do. So that's the background of the cluster. Where do you fit in that? I'm not going to suggest that I understand ZPN's business model better than you do, but what I do understand is that the things you're thinking about, mobile charging, really critical for so many applications, the whole issue of storage rather than manufacture, are really important. How you get to rapid and ultra rapid as adoption grows, critical. And so you are thinking about some of the issues that will drive this adoption forward and remove some of the barriers. And I love the idea that on the side of some of your products, it actually says very proudly, made in Coventry, and I've got my own picture standing next to that. So obviously you're in a good place there. So what are the public policy issues then to get people thinking at the end? Because this isn't going to naturally happen. There do need to be some decisions, and I've written down 6, which I think are still at play, really. The first one, and probably no surprises for calling this one out, is definitely the question of how much public subsidy is the national government willing to put on the table to be competitive in this sector. The rumours are there of what's been put on the table for Tata. It's a very substantial sum of money, if it's true. We've obviously seen, it's in the public domain, what's been put on the table for the relatively small Nissan Gigafactory up in the northeast. But those numbers are no more than the going rate internationally. If the Tata one is true, it takes us to a new level of public subsidy. And so actually, I think the really good thing about this is it says that the British government is prepared to compete internationally with what's been done in Spain, in Germany, in Hungary, in Poland, and even more extreme what's happening in the US. But we do need to see that consistently happen if we are going to be serious global players in this new technology going forward. I'm much more optimistic about that than I was 3 months ago. And if I may be slightly political, the advent of Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor has definitely made a difference to this, because he has been here, walked the site of Coventry, understands the need for these subsidies for us to be competitive. So that's the first really big issue. The second issue is obviously around adoption by the public. Now, we've seen some good progress here, but our tax incentives are actually very small compared to some European countries in terms of what's going on. And where in particular I'd call out, there's a very live issue about taxi grants. It's helped LEVC in their infancy. They've now been removed, and there's going to be a very interesting debate, particularly for heavy goods vehicles, about how the tax incentive system can deal with that, because obviously the business case is a lot less good for the heavy goods vehicles. There's definitely some issue there. The next one I want to call out is actually about land pricing and what public subsidy can be used there. And we're actually right at the vortex of this at the moment in the combined authority. So to have a sort of charging infrastructure of the quality that we need to use some of your products, the CA is committed, public money, the leaders have all agreed this, that we'll have a network of ultra-fast charging stations like petrol stations at key sites across the region. A couple of sites in Coventry are likely to be the first that we actually deliver on. But we're competing for those sites when the market is still immature with lots of other land users. So again, there is an interesting public policy issue about how much public subsidy is necessary to always kickstart, get that flywheel turning there. And as I say, we're right in the middle of that. Then there's this one about skills development. Again, we don't have all the skills for this sector at the moment. How much public money is being put on the table to encourage colleges to put what's right in there? And I'll just get you to think about this through the lens of the retrofit piece. We thought, get a few test cases for retrofit, the industry will grow on its own. But actually, that's not happened because it's not yet consistent in supply and in demand. Some of the college providers aren't yet doing the courses we would want. They're not subscribers we would want. So again, there's a question of how we're going to stimulate that market to really get that established. There's then obviously a really critical question about the national grid, its sufficiency, how quickly people can get connected to it. I've got companies ringing me up all the time saying waiting for a grid connection, it's 5 years, it's not good enough, it's not competitive. So what are we going to do about that? Do we just accept that or not? We can't accept it. So again, we're saying what's the role for regions in helping with their city councils, of course, helping plan that grid structure. One of the things we asked for in, slightly technical point, our devolution deal was a formal role in that. It wasn't granted yet, but I'm prepared to commit that it does come eventually, because that's got to move much faster than it is at the moment. And then the last big one, of course, is how much cash is the public sector going to put on the table to encourage retrofitting. I gave you the numbers, it's small fry. Everyone celebrates saying we're doing these small test cases, brilliant, but it is not going to be achievable that the public sector subsidises the numbers 300,000. It's not going to happen. 300,000 homes here, multiply that up across the country. So the real question there is what's the private sector model to actually get a return on that retrofitting? How does the public and the private sector share the risk and the reward? None of our banks have yet come up with a solution to that. So there's definitely an issue for government about how they work with the private sector to do that. So those are 6 issues that come out. So my conclusion would be saying thank you for what you're doing, your stimuli, and hopefully by driving on the ground, you can encourage those of us with that public responsibility to think about how we address those bigger issues that hopefully will make you successful. Thank you very much indeed. Very happy to take a few questions.
A
couple of questions. Yeah.
Anyone here want to take a question? I could maybe ask one first.
Please.
So when you're talking about subsidies,
yes,
how do you see the subsidies affecting things like asset finance? Because the asset finance market hates high capital things because they're always relying on other people's balance sheets. How do you see that happening? Can you talk to Jeremy Hunt and give him a bit?
I think it depends what you mean by the question, because there's 2 different things here. So I was talking with Jeremy Hunt about the subsidy to an investor coming in to choose to make their investment here rather than abroad. I do think that point is landed. We have only got, though, £1 billion in the Automotive Transformation Fund, which so far has provided all these. So there is a relatively urgent decision to see that number grow from Treasury. That was the Jeremy Hunt piece. There is, though, a much wider question in what you are talking about, in that there are actually very different business models here. And that's, in a sense, my last point, being cheeky about the banks, because they have got to become much more comfortable with the sort of business models that you are talking about. Now, I don't actually think that's a conversation directly with the Chancellor, if I'm very honest. I think there's actually a question for the financial markets about how they're going to respond to the new opportunities here. Now, I have tried to have the conversation with HSBC, with all the senior people, but nobody, unless anyone will correct me, and I'd love to be corrected on this, frankly, no one I see really coming forward from the financial sector to say we see a sustainable opportunity here, particularly in retrofit, to get the returns that we want. So there are 2 different parts to this debate. One's straight public subsidy, one's a financial markets issue.
Fantastic. Anyone else got a question?
I can't believe it. I've stunned everyone into silence, or bored you, one or the other. One or the other. Anything you want to nudge me on, though? It doesn't have to be a question. Any observation? Do you think my assessment of that is right, or anything you'd like to just mark the card on?
Andy, are there any moves in your discussions with Jeremy Hunt and therefore maybe the Treasury for them to re-look at tax breaks that have been taken away?
For adoption of electric
vehicles, and also for reliefs for organisations to invest in those capital projects?
Yeah.
Because that's quite cumbersome at the moment. So
the answer is not yet. However, again, this is where I say I am much more optimistic than I was. So let me explain what I mean by that and connecting it back. And I'll be straightforward on the politics of it here. When Theresa May was Prime Minister and Greg Clark was Business Secretary and Philip Hammond was Chancellor, there were effectively a lot of encouragement to particular industrial sectors. Now that could be a tax subsidy for adoption, it could be particular investment incentives. And that was because they believed in an industrial strategy. So do I. The West Midlands has its 8 priority clusters that we want to get behind, and you can see from what I've said, we don't have the cash that national government does, but you can do things to sort of stimulate the sectors. I fervently believe in that. We then went to a period, and I'll be straightforward about it, with Boris Johnson, where there was no belief in a national industrial strategy. And steadily, these things were removed. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, who was business secretary, just said, don't believe in it. I'm a free market economics person, don't believe in it. And we now find ourselves in a position where Europe and the USA are putting huge subsidies in, and we have to compete. Now, the reason I'm an optimist is that Jeremy has come in his budget in March. He said there are 5 priority sectors for us to compete, 5 new sectors. MedTech was obviously probably the biggest and most exciting. This was the second. And he has commissioned work in the Treasury about what is required to up Britain's performance in these areas. So he's far from a laissez-faire do nothing. And so the whole question of what is the right public use of money for stimulating those sectors is back in discussion in the Treasury. And I expect, he's been very clear with me when he came to Coventry for the discussion, I'm expecting in the autumn statement we will see the outcome of that work. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Nope. There you are. You can get on with your conference.
They're all very polite.
Oh, there you go.
You got
Award, one or the other. Okay, all right. Okay, thank you all, and most importantly, good luck to you all.